Helaena Targaryen is a character from the book Fire and Blood, as well as the TV show House of the Dragon, and there's been a lot of talk on the internet about whether or not Helaena is autistic, basically. At least the TV show version of her. I don't think book Helaena has the same debate, because the book is written like a history recorded by maesters who obviously don't know what the word means. Whereas in a TV show we can see her behaviour firsthand, and from time to time on my videos on House of the Dragon I've had comments cropping up asking, do I think Helaena is autistic? So I suppose I wanted to talk about it. I am a psychodynamic counsellor and psychotherapist. I do have thoughts on the subject, obviously, but it's a complicated question to try and answer. If you know my channel very well, you might already guess what my overall answer is going to be at the end of this, but we're gonna go through it carefully together before we get to that. And I should also specify that whilst I am a therapist and I have worked with people on the autistic spectrum, I have no specialisation to professionally diagnose it. Diagnosing anything is nowhere near as simple as YouTube can make it seem. Which then might have you wondering, well, why the hell am I making this video in the first place if I don't diagnose in my work? And you'll see if you stick around, because in a way that is very relevant to the argument I want to make, so we will get to that. But let's first begin with the basic question. People generally just asking, is Helaena Targaryen autistic, yes or no? So I was curious if anyone else had made a video on this topic. I can't say I looked particularly hard, but I managed to find one.
I'm going to give you 100% proof if she is or if she isn't.
100% proof? I'm not sure you can. I don't think diagnosis is as straightforward as...
It appears that Hodor was on the spectrum. We've seen this from the movements of him just rocking himself back and forth. We know that a lot of people do that.
Yeah, a lot of people do that, but it's not like an only autistic thing. It can be a sign of trauma or OCD or all sorts of different things. I'm not sure you can just...
But the story of Hodor is different because Hodor was a normal functioning kid until he was warged by Bran, and that is what caused him to go into the whole Hodor situation.
Okay, that's a good point, because one of the criteria for diagnosing autism, according to the DSM, is that the symptoms must be present in early development. If it's a specific traumatic event that led to a lot of Hodor's behaviours, then sure...
Now, does this mean a similar situation could have happened to her? Could she have seen something so traumatic that's going to happen in the future? If this person is sending her these dreams, did they send her something so traumatic that it caused her to become autistic?
No! You're so close to making a good point. No, you don't become autistic due to a traumatic event. That would suggest PTSD. I'm having a bit of fun, and I don't want to be too harsh here, and this is also slightly beside the point, but it's a good example for why you can't just look at classic symptoms associated with autism, spot them in another person, and therefore just conclude they are autistic. There are lots of other possibilities. All the same, let's begin with some of the traits, some of the reasons people argue Helaena is autistic. Helaena is seen to have a fascination with insects as well as sewing, often patterns involving insects. A preference for specific interests and fascinations can be an autistic trait, as can repetitive behaviours and rituals, which I suppose you could class her interest in insects as. It seems to be what she spends most of her time doing. Secondly, Helaena very much seems to enjoy spending time on her own, and it's possible you could argue she struggles to engage socially. We don't see her interacting with many people besides her mother seeking her out. With her own children, Helaena is often sitting at a distance to them, quietly engaging with her own thing. We see her in one scene making a comment about her children's play to a maid, but it sounds more factual.
It is our fate, I think, to crave always what is given to another. If one possesses a thing, the other will take it away.
Yes, Princess.
And in the same vein, Helaena doesn't regularly communicate in ways that follow the social norms of Westeros, for which I think she is often misunderstood and overlooked by the other characters. I think what she says is just dismissed most of the time as Helaena being weird, rather than listening, rather than questioning what she's expressing.
The Queen is an enduring mystery.
I think Helaena possibly has a sensory interest in insects, enjoying or exploring the sensation of them crawling across her hand. And there is also the argument to say Helaena can be overstimulated. Arguably in the funeral procession, the extreme noise and sensations and emotions appear to overwhelm her. I think the big one people tend to point out is the fact that when Vaemond is beheaded in front of her, Helaena covers her ears rather than her eyes. What else? Some have mentioned the blood and cheese scene from episode 1 of season 2. Her children's lives are under threat, rather than fight or scream or break down begging, as a lot of the audience seems to expect to be the ordinary thing. Helaena largely goes quiet, silently walks out with Jaehaera at the first available moment, walks to her mother's chambers and says,
They killed the boy.
and again, these are things you can just list. I've done so in a pretty bare bones way there, that you can just list them and say these correlate with autistic traits and behaviours, and it's hard to put a definite counter argument to that in a lot of ways, because it's not exactly wrong. And it does make a lot of sense for people to relate to or interpret Helaena in that way. However, it's complicated, so let's discuss that. So yes, as we've said, it isn't as simple as just spotting possible traits and therefore making a link. Not just because there could be other diagnoses that are more preferable, but also I think we do still have a lack of concrete evidence. For example, not only are there lots of reasons for people to have special fascinations, particularly at a young age. Helaena, I think, is supposed to be about 10 in episodes 6 and 7. That could be quite typical, but also we don't see much of Helaena, whilst also knowing that there aren't really that many things for her to do. She's not trained to fight and doesn't want to. Presumably she has been trained to ride Dragonback and to speak Valyrian, but we don't see any of those things on screen. What is there for a woman to do in Westeros royalty? Engage in the political intricacies of the Red Keep, like Rhaenyra and Rhaenys and Alicent try to do? Well, yes, the question there would then be, does Helaena avoid this because she was never encouraged to or never taught to, or because she has no interest, in which case why? We could hazard a good guess there, but we don't concretely know. Even then, Viserys, who does have loads more to do, still devotes a ton of his time working incredibly hard on a large model of Valyria. He often neglects important or uncomfortable duties in favour of that. Should we therefore conclude Viserys is autistic, or is it just ruling a kingdom is incredibly stressful, and this is his therapeutic, quiet means to relieve stress? I mean, it could be both of those things, and maybe that's a slightly pedantic, tenuous argument, but it is still worth mentioning. A less pedantic argument would be the dragon dreams. The show makes it very clear that Helaena experiences prophetic dreams and visions, for which she makes all sorts of prophetic comments. Beware the beast under the boards, being a sign about Rhaenys bursting through the floor. She mentions Aemond having to close an eye. Obviously there was talk of rats before blood and cheese happened. Could all of her social struggles in fact just be a symptom of these overwhelming dreams that make it difficult to process reality in present moments and her feelings? Could they contribute to feeling overstimulated and overwhelmed? Yes, it's possible. We know she's not fully conscious of her dreams and their meaning based on how abstractly she talks about them, and also how, despite the comment about rats, she is in total shock at the event of blood and cheese. These aren't visions she seems to understand clearly and concretely, at least not at the beginning. By the end of season 2 she seems to have found some more clarity about her experiences.
Aegon will be king again. He sits on a wooden throne, and you'll be dead.
That's certainly possible. We can't say either way for sure, because the show isn't really giving us any moments to see Helaena clearly struggling with her dreams, for us to know what she feels about them, what it feels like to be having them. Vaemond's beheading, I suppose you could argue she covers her ears because the noise is unpleasant. She does also look away, or you could say she is hearing something prophetic and trying to shut that out, but I actually think that's a weak counter-argument. The fact she does also cover cover her ears during the riot, I think makes it more likely Helaena is overwhelmed by the emotion and experience and sensation of Vaemon's death, rather than it being anything dream-related. It's worth saying she could have dragon dreams and be autistic. It's not one or the other. In fact, I think that even plays into something of the generic autistic or neurodivergent trope about being magically gifted in some kind of way. You know, that tendency to view autism like a superpower, because no, it's actually the magical ability of dragon dreams. It's not Helaena just happens to struggle with certain social cues and things, it's that she's on another level to everyone else. I don't know, there isn't anything necessarily wrong with these ideas. I don't think we see enough of Helaena to say that the show is directly leaning into that trope, but I do always feel uncomfortable about it, because I don't think autism is a superpower. I think it's just a thing, and it could come with certain advantages, but also disadvantages, especially in a world that still struggles to accommodate difference. I don't think anyone neurodivergent who isn't magically gifted or supremely talented in some way is somehow lesser. I think we can all have things that make certain situations and experiences difficult for us without it having to devalue us as people, you know? And I do worry the trend of presenting autistic traits as some byproduct of a much greater advanced superpower is a little undermining in that sense. That one might just be me. I got a little bit carried away there, so maybe I should just discuss trauma now. I work with children and adolescents, mainly children, and I think that does somewhat colour my opinions here, but it is fairly common that symptoms of PTSD can be mistaken for traits of autism in children. I have worked with kids before whose parents or their teachers were dead sets on the child being autistic, absolutely no question on the matter. They would just tell you that's the case. Has the kid been tested? No, but doesn't need to be because they just know it's true. Not that that's the only reason to be tested, by the way. But I felt less certain in a lot of those scenarios. I wouldn't argue they're wrong because, as I say, diagnosis is a difficult thing. It should be professionally tested rather than just me chipping in my opinion as though it was fact. Therapists do get things wrong. I think part of the job is expecting and knowing you might get things wrong and being conscious of that. But sometimes they were then tested and the conclusion was no, this isn't autism, this is trauma. And trauma is just one example, but there is a lot that can overlap. Repetitive behaviours and interests can be a coping mechanism for trauma. I don't think my girlfriend Kirsty will mind me saying that as a child she used to watch the films Nanny McPhee and 13th Ghost pretty much most nights, and that could be taken as a sign of autism, or it could be a symptom of trauma, or, you know, a load of other possibilities. The blood and cheese scene I talked about in my video on episode 1, it's not that weird at all for Helaena to react the way she does in that scene. It's a perfectly normal trauma response and a sign of shock. She goes numb, she quietly gets out of there, gets to somewhere safe. And the way she says they killed the boy rather than saying Jaehaerys or my son, that suggests to me dissociation in response to trauma. Anyone, neurodivergent or not, could react that way. Classic cinema may have conditioned us to think that the normal response is just screaming and crying, but not always. Basically, I guess I was just saying there's lots of different possibilities. Trauma is one example. Could Helaena struggle with trauma? Yes, I don't think that's at all far-fetched to say in the world of Westeros, especially when trauma is one of the big themes in a lot of George R.R. Martin's writing. However, let's flip this round again. You can have both autism and PTSD, as well as many other things. And also, autism is a spectrum, and it doesn't look the same for everybody. Helaena does have traits that could correlate, and we're never going to see her be professionally assessed, so maybe. I think you might want to ask her or Alicent about past experiences of trauma, but if Helaena was in our modern world, yes, it would be worth suggesting having an assessment with an autism specialist. So, in that sense, what's my diagnosis? Basically that we cannot rule out autism. I think it's a valid suggestion to make, and if you were really pressing me to pick one single diagnosis for Helaena, then I probably would say autism makes the most sense, but I avoid speaking concretely there for a good reason. Too often I think people look to therapists to make clear judgments on these kind of things. Is a person this or that, yes or no? And I think the correct answer should be that they need to be properly assessed. I've heard stories about clients who go to their therapists and say, I think I'm autistic, I've read a load of things, I'm wondering if I could be, only for their therapist to say, no, you're absolutely not, because of this reason based on my small experience of sessions with you. And how that can then cause problems, because they could be wrong. That's not a professional assessment. I think that's a really important point to make. I think it's a big part of why I wanted to make this video and what I wanted to stress, that whilst there is a lot of worth to exploring these characters and understanding diagnosis and learning and educating ourselves in those things, it's obviously a lot of positives there. But I do sometimes have a concern about this increasing culture to sit and make armchair observations about people. I think this yes or no way of approaching a person is the wrong way. But I've already made a video about why I tend to avoid diagnosing characters in my big analysis videos. I sometimes do, I've often regretted it. And also, this isn't my main conclusion for the video. I still think there's a bigger point to be made, so what's that? It's basically to ask, what does it actually mean either way if Helaena is autistic or not? Or even just neurodivergent or not? Because personally, I was really disappointed with Helena's characterisation in Season 2. I think she had a big part in the first episode, ending very traumatically for her. We then had a brief scene of her being overwhelmed at the funeral procession that followed, but after that, not much else. Helaena is given so little focus in the show, so little voice and space for any exploration at all, especially after how impactful the first episode was on her. To then see such scarce glimpses of Helaena is a real shame. Hopefully we do get better in Season 3. I was thinking at the start of this season that maybe I'd make a character analysis on her when Season 2 was finished, but I just don't really think we've seen enough in the show to analyse much at all. She goes mostly forgotten, and then pops up near the end to make it explicit that she has prophetic dreams and that she appears to understand them much better now. But how did she get to that place? What was the journey? What does she feel in other ways? It frustrates me because there could be something really interesting here. Someone neurodivergent in a time and world where that is completely misunderstood. Let's explore what that's like for Helaena. How she feels about it, some of the challenges. Where does her dragon dreams fit into that? Does she link the two things or not? What is her emotional journey? There's so much to explore there. There could be so many themes to do with the struggles of neurodivergence in communities that fail to understand it. I think that could be really meaningful, but we don't really do any of it. And in that sense, what can Helaena possibly being autistic actually mean other than yes, she is autistic, or no, she isn't? Suddenly it just feels like the simple label, you know? I'm speaking with a lot of personal opinion for this conclusion, but I think a well-written character with autism or ADHD or trauma or whatever it might be, I think of a well-written character you could say yes and. Yes, she is autistic, and this is how that affects her life, or how she feels about it, or how the people around her feel. These are some of the struggles, these are the conclusions she's reached, this is how it informs her relationships, for good or bad. Here is meaning around that, you know? Or maybe even just say yes, but there are also lots of other things about her too. Because she's a complex human being, and like all human beings, no diagnosis and no checklist of behaviour entirely encapsulates everything that person is. It's important, definitely, but this is another reason I tend to avoid diagnoses in my character analysis videos, because sometimes I think where they should be informing the character. I instead tend to feel that in a lot of videos I see, they can fall into the trap where the label of the diagnosis and the set of criteria become like a barrier to stop us engaging and empathising with the person beyond that. I think the main goal of all of my character analysis videos is empathy and feeling closer to the character. At its best, the diagnosis should inform that, but there's also the potential for it to kind of reduce them to a scientific list, you know? If autism is a spectrum and everybody is different, then who is Helaena specifically? I don't think the show really gives us enough to explore that question in depth. We get glimpses of a relationship with Aegon, but surprisingly little. I think Aemond is maybe attracted to her and harbours some resentment about that. I think Alicent kind of feels like she's failed Helaena somehow, but that's largely it, and all of that is what Helaena means to others rather than her side and her feelings. I just don't think it goes far enough, and again, there is a total lack of clarity about her dragon dreams in relation to that, about how she feels about them, how they are experienced, how they affect her, how other Targaryens who used to have dreams would have felt. I kind of feel like we're deliberately denied that clarity, because exploring all sorts of neurodivergent experiences is quite a big box for the show to unpack, and perhaps they were hesitant to, or perhaps just being able to vaguely nod at the idea of autism without having to really say anything meaningful there, having this misty cloak where it could just be dragon dreams. Maybe that felt like enough to them. But to me, that then makes this show sometimes feel like it's just saying Helaena is a bit different and autistically coded enough for people to relate to that if they want to, but without us having to really say anything more or exploring anything that could make the characterization fulfilling. I don't know. I mean, there's still something to learn from and something to relate to here. I think Tia Sabin is doing an incredibly good job in this performance. I should stress that, but it is a shame that there isn't more for her to engage with, or us to engage with, in a discussion beyond just kind of listing the possible traits of autism and either saying yes or no. It's important to have representation, and it's still a positive, but I guess I just don't feel it's positive enough. So I guess, yeah, these are my 3 main points for this video. A, autism is a valid hypothesis for Helaena. We cannot rule it out, and if she is written as autistically coded, then I don't think this is an inaccurate depiction. I think it's pretty solid there. B, diagnosing is hard, and we should be careful as a result. That's not just me copping out of the video, it's a really important point in itself. And C, even if she is written as an autistic character, and even if it is pretty accurate, and I think her part is performed really, really well, I still don't think there's enough here for it to be as meaningful as it should. I don't know, I just feel that's kind of a problem. Maybe that's just me. I am very intrigued to know what other people think, because part of me wonders I've just got this one completely wrong, and if you do feel the show does explore her a lot more than I'm suggesting, please drop a comment and set out some of the stuff I might be missing, because I could be. I think my disappointment with Helaena not getting much to do this season after episode 1, I think that might be clouding my view, so maybe that's just me. But yeah, let me know, like the video if you liked it, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.